Story 1. The Babysitter. I was 14 when I started babysitting for the Hendersons. They lived 3 houses down from us in our suburb outside Portland, and Mrs. Henderson had asked my mom if I'd be interested in watching their daughter Emma on Friday nights. Emma was 7, quiet, easy to manage. The money was good for a kid my age, and honestly, I liked having the house to myself after Emma went to bed. The Henderson house was newer than ours, with an open floor plan downstairs and this massive living room with windows that faced their backyard. Everything was clean, organized, minimal. Mrs. Henderson always left me notes on the kitchen counter, Emma's bedtime, emergency numbers, where the snacks were. I babysat there maybe 6 or 7 times before anything felt off. It was early November, around 7:30 at night. Emma had just gone upstairs to brush her teeth, and I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone. That's when I heard it. A knock. 3 slow knocks on the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. I looked up, and there was nothing there. Just darkness pressing against the glass, and my own reflection staring back at me. I figured it was a branch or something, even though there weren't any trees close to the house. I went back to my phone. 2 minutes later, another knock. Same door. 3 slow, deliberate taps. This time I stood up and walked closer to the glass, cupping my hands around my face to see outside. The backyard was empty. The motion light wasn't on. I checked the lock on the door. It was secure. I told myself it was nothing and sat back down, but my stomach felt tight. Emma came downstairs in her pajamas, holding a stuffed rabbit, and asked if we could watch a movie. I said sure. We put on something animated, and I tried to focus, but I kept glancing at that glass door. About 20 minutes into the movie, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered it. Silence. I said hello twice, then hung up. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Same number. This time I didn't answer. Emma looked at me and asked if everything was okay. I smiled and said yeah, just a spam call. But my hands were shaking. The knocking started again. 3 taps, same door. Emma heard it this time. She looked at me, then at the door, and asked, "Who's that?" I didn't know what to say. I stood up, walked to the door, and this time I unlocked it and slid it open a crack. Cold air rushed in. I stepped outside onto the patio and looked around. Nothing. No one. The yard was still. I went back inside, locked the door, and closed the curtains. I told Emma it was probably just the wind. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. We finished the movie. I put Emma to bed around 9, read her a story, and came back downstairs. The house felt different now. Bigger. Quieter. I sat on the couch and turned the TV volume up, trying to drown out the silence. That's when my phone rang again. Same unknown number. I answered it this time, ready to tell whoever it was to stop. But before I could say anything, I heard breathing. Slow, steady breathing. Then a voice, low and calm, said, "I can see you." I hung up immediately. My whole body went cold. I ran to the front door and checked the lock, then the back door, then every window on the first floor. Everything was locked. I stood in the kitchen, trying to think, trying to calm down. I thought about calling my parents, but I didn't want to sound crazy. I thought about calling the Hendersons, but what would I even say? I decided to just stay calm and wait it out. They'd be home in less than 2 hours. I sat back down on the couch, facing the curtains that covered the sliding glass door. That's when I noticed it. The curtain was moving, just slightly, like there was air coming through. But I'd locked that door. I knew I'd locked it. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my ears, and walked toward the curtain. I reached out and pulled it back. The door was open. Not all the way, just a crack. Maybe 6 inches. Enough for someone to reach through. I slammed it shut and locked it again. my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip the handle. Then I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, coming from Emma's room. I stood frozen in the living room, staring at the ceiling, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard Emma's door creak open. I forced myself to move. I ran upstairs, my legs weak, my throat tight, and pushed open her door. Emma was asleep. The room was empty. I checked her closet. Nothing. I checked under her bed. Nothing. But her window was open. Just a crack. I know I didn't open it. Mrs. Henderson had told me the first night I babysat that they never opened the upstairs windows because the screens were broken. I closed it and locked it. Then I sat on the floor next to Emma's bed and waited. I didn't move until I heard the Hendersons' car pull into the driveway. When they came inside, I told them everything. Mr. Henderson went outside with a flashlight and checked the yard, the side of the house, the street. He didn't find anyone. Mrs. Henderson called the police. They came, took a report, searched the property. Nothing. They said it was probably kids messing around. But I knew it wasn't. The Hendersons paid me for the night and drove me home. I never babysat for them again. 2 weeks later, my mom told me the Hendersons had installed a security system. She said Mrs. Henderson had mentioned that someone had tried to break in the night before they installed it. They'd left footprints in the flower bed under Emma's window. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't want to know. But sometimes I still think about that voice on the phone. I can see you, and I wonder how long he'd been watching before I noticed. Story 2. The voicemail. This happened in 2019, the summer before I started college. I was 18, living at home with my parents in a small town in upstate New York. I worked part-time at a grocery store and spent most of my free time hanging out with friends or driving around because there wasn't much else to do. One night in late July, I went to bed around midnight after scrolling through Instagram for an hour. I plugged my phone in on my nightstand and fell asleep. I woke up to my phone ringing. The screen said it was 3:47 a.m., unknown number. I let it go to voicemail and rolled over, annoyed. A minute later, my phone buzzed. Voicemail notification. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. I held the phone up to my ear and listened. At first, there was nothing, just silence. Then I heard it, my own voice. I'm in the kitchen. That was it. 3 seconds of audio. My voice, my exact tone saying, I'm in the kitchen. I sat up in bed, fully awake now, my heart racing. I played it again. Same thing. It was my voice. I was sure of it. I checked the number that had called me. Unknown. I tried calling it back. The line didn't ring. It just went dead. I sat there in the dark, trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe it was some kind of prank. Maybe someone had recorded me at work or spliced together audio from a video I'd posted online. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I got out of bed and opened my bedroom door. The hallway was dark. I listened. The house was silent. I walked to the top of the stairs and looked down. Nothing. I went back to my room, closed the door, and locked it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I told my mom about the voicemail. She listened to it and frowned. She said it did sound like me, but she suggested it could have been a robocall or some kind of scam. I wanted to believe her, but it didn't feel right. Over the next few days, I kept checking my phone, waiting for another call. Nothing. I started to relax. Then, a week later, it happened again. Same time. 3:47 a.m., unknown number. I answered this time. I said hello. No response, just silence. Then faintly, I heard something in the background. Footsteps and breathing. I hung up and immediately checked the voicemail that came through a second later. This time, my voice said, I'm standing by your bed. I threw my phone across the room. I turned on every light in my bedroom and checked my closet. under my bed, behind my door. Nothing. I grabbed my phone and ran downstairs to my parents' room. I woke my dad up and told him everything. He listened to the voicemail. His face went pale. He got up, grabbed a flashlight, and checked every room in the house. All the doors were locked. All the windows were secure. There was no one inside. My dad called the police. They came out, took a report, listened to the voicemail. They said it sounded like a spoofing scam and that I should block the number and report it. But you can't block an unknown number. And they couldn't explain how someone had my voice. The calls stopped after that night. No more voicemails. No more unknown numbers. But a month later, I was helping my mom clean out the garage, and I found an old box of VHS tapes from when I was a kid. We brought them inside and played a few on the old VCR my parents still had. One of the tapes was from a family dinner when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. I was sitting at the kitchen table, talking to the camera, and at one point, I stood up and said, "I'm in the kitchen." The exact same tone. The exact same words. I stopped the tape and just stared at the screen. My mom asked what was wrong. I didn't tell her. I took the tape and put it back in the box. Later that night, I went through all my old social media posts, every video I'd ever uploaded, every account I'd ever made. I couldn't find that phrase anywhere. The only place it existed was on that VHS tape, a tape that had been sitting in our garage for almost a decade. I don't know who called me. I don't know how they got that audio. But sometimes, late at night, I think about the second voicemail. I'm standing by your bed, and I wonder if they were. Story 3. The neighbor I moved into my first apartment in March of 2021. It was a small one-bedroom in a 4-unit building in a quiet part of Denver. The rent was cheap, the landlord seemed decent, and I was just happy to finally be on my own. The apartment directly below mine was occupied by a man I only saw a handful of times. He was maybe in his 50s, average height, thinning hair, always wore a jacket, even when it was warm outside. The first time I saw him, I was bringing groceries in from my car, and he was standing on the sidewalk smoking a cigarette. He smiled at me and said, "You're the new tenant upstairs." I said, "Yeah, nice to meet you." He nodded and didn't say anything else. That was the extent of our interactions for the first few weeks. But I started noticing things. Small things. Like I'd come home from work, and my doormat would be shifted slightly to the left. Or I'd take the trash out in the morning, and when I came back, my door would be unlocked, even though I was sure I'd locked it. I chalked it up to me being forgetful or paranoid. New place, new routines. But then I started hearing him. At night, I'd hear footsteps directly below me. Not unusual, obviously, but they'd stop right under my bedroom, and they'd stay there for minutes at a time. I'd be lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, and I'd hear him pacing in his apartment, back and forth, and then the footsteps would stop right below where I was lying, and he'd just stand there. I tried to ignore it. Then, one night in early April, I woke up to a sound, a faint scratching noise. I turned on my bedside lamp and listened. It was coming from the floor, directly below my bed. Scratch, 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 slow and deliberate, like someone dragging something sharp across wood. I sat up and waited. The scratching stopped. I turned off the light and lay back down. A few seconds later, it started again. I got out of bed, grabbed my phone, and walked into the living room. I thought about calling the landlord, but what would I even say? My neighbor is making noise in his own apartment. I tried to go back to sleep on the couch. The next day, I ran into him in the hallway. He was standing outside his door, holding a bag of trash, and he smiled at me. I smiled back, trying to be polite, and he said, "I can hear you walking around up there at night." His tone was friendly, conversational, but something about the way he said it made my stomach drop. I said, "Oh, sorry. I'll try to be quieter." He shook his head and said, No. It's fine. I like it. Makes me feel less alone." I didn't know how to respond to that. I just nodded and went upstairs. That night, I moved my bed away from the wall and positioned it in the center of the room. I figured if he was listening to me walk around, I'd at least make it harder for him to pinpoint where I was. But the scratching didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Now it followed me. Wherever I walked, I'd hear it below me a few seconds later. I started staying at my boyfriend's place more often. I didn't tell him why. I just said my apartment was too noisy. But I couldn't avoid going home forever. One night in late April, I came home around 10 p.m. after a long shift at work. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. The lights were off. I flipped the switch. Nothing. The bulb had burned out. I used my phone flashlight to navigate to the kitchen and grab a new bulb from the cabinet. As I was screwing it into the socket, I heard my front door creak open behind me. I turned around. The neighbor was standing in my doorway. He wasn't smiling this time. He said, "You left your door unlocked." I know I didn't. I locked it. I always locked it. I said, "Oh, thanks. I'll be more careful." He stepped inside. I took a step back. He said, "You've been gone a lot." I didn't respond. He looked around my apartment, slowly, like he was cataloging everything. Then he looked at me and said, "I was starting to think you moved out." I forced a smile and said, "No, just busy. But I'm pretty tired, so..." He cut me off and said, "I used to have a daughter about your age." My blood went cold. I said, "That's nice." He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me. Finally, I said, "I really need to get some sleep." He nodded, turned, and walked out. I locked the door behind him. Then I pushed my couch in front of it. I called my landlord the next morning and told him I needed to break my lease. He asked why. I said personal reasons. He didn't push. I moved out 2 weeks later. I didn't say goodbye to the neighbor. I didn't see him again. But a month after I left, I got a text from my old landlord. He said the police had been to the building. They'd found a collection of photographs in the neighbor's apartment. Photos of women. Women who'd lived in the building over the years. Some of them were taken through windows. Some of them were taken inside apartments. He didn't say if I was in any of them. I didn't ask. I just thanked him for letting me know and blocked his number. I still think about that night he came into my apartment. The way he looked around. The way he said, "I used to have a daughter about your age." And I wonder what he meant by used to. Story 4. The Roundhouse. This happened when I was 16, in the fall of 2015. I lived with my parents and younger brother in a suburb outside Charlotte. Our street was quiet, lined with nearly identical two-story houses, most of them built in the early 2000s. It was the kind of neighborhood where people waved at each other, but didn't really know each other. One Friday night in October, I went to a party at my friend Jenna's house. Her parents were out of town, and a bunch of us from school were hanging out, drinking, nothing too crazy. I left around midnight because I had a curfew, and I was already pushing it. I was a little buzzed, but not drunk. I'd only had 2 beers over the course of 3 hours. I drove home, parked in front of my house, and walked up to the front door. I unlocked it with my key and stepped inside. The house was dark. I figured my parents and brother were already asleep. I closed the door behind me, locked it, and kicked off my shoes. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't bad, just different. Like someone had been cooking something unfamiliar. I walked into the living room and froze. The furniture was wrong. The couch wasn't ours. The TV was in the wrong place. The photos on the wall weren't of my family. I stood there, trying to process what I was seeing, and then I heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy footsteps, coming down the hallway. I turned and ran for the front door. I unlocked it, yanked it open, and sprinted to my car. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there shaking, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I looked at the house. It looked like mine. Same style, same color, same layout. But it wasn't. I checked the address on the mailbox. It was one number off from ours. I'd walked into the wrong house. I'd unlocked the door with my key, which somehow fit, and I'd gone inside without realizing. I started my car and drove 2 houses down to my actual house. I parked, ran inside, and locked the door behind me. My mom was in the kitchen getting a glass of water. She asked if I had fun at Jenna's. I said yeah. I didn't tell her what happened. I went upstairs, got into bed, and lay there staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I drove past the house I'd walked into. There was a car in the driveway I didn't recognize. I slowed down, trying to see if anyone was outside, but the blinds were closed. I kept driving. I never told anyone what happened. Not my parents, not my friends, not Jenna. I just tried to forget about it. But a few weeks later, my mom mentioned that the family who lived in that house had moved out suddenly. She said it was strange because they'd only been there for a few months. I asked why they left. She said she didn't know, but a neighbor had told her the wife seemed really shaken up about something. I didn't ask any more questions. I just nodded and changed the subject. But sometimes I think about that night, about how my key fit their lock, about how I walked into a stranger's house and didn't realize it until I was already inside. And I think about those footsteps I heard upstairs, coming down the hallway toward me. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed a few seconds longer, if I'd turned around to see who was coming down those stairs. I wonder if the reason that family moved out so suddenly had anything to do with me. If the wife saw something on a security camera, a teenage girl walking into her house in the middle of the night, unlocking the door like she lived there. And I wonder if she called the police, if they told her it was just a mistake, or if they told her something else, something that made her pack up and leave. I don't know, and I don't think I want to. This is Shadefall Tales, where every shadow hides a story and every story leaves a mark. If you made it to the end, you're braver than most. Subscribe if you dare to hear more tales from the darkness, because the next story might be closer to home than you think. Sweet dreams.